what are the behaviors and the patterns in your life right now that if you were to be rigorously honest, you'd go, this continues to lead me to chaos and insanity. Great. Let's start there and work backwards.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the PK podcast. As you know, that PK stands for Preacher's Kid, and it does not stand for Perfect Kid. It's a good thing too, because if it did, I would not have a co-host. How are you doing, Eli Blevins? One of the most not perfect people that I know.
I love it. You're the most encouraging person ever. Whenever I get on here,
I'm always here to be positive, encouraging, and uplifting like K-Love. Just like the social media where we met. Twitter is always it's like a bed of comfort and positivity. If you need to be uplifted in your day, Twitter is the place to be.
Absolutely. That's where we met. So that's incredible. But no, everything's good here. I know you want the weather update. It's just hot.
That's good.
There's nothing to it. It's hot. I don't know why you always like knowing what the weather is here every time I talk to you, but
I want the weather report in Wilmington, North Carolina, because whenever you tell me anything negative, I kind of celebrate it a little bit, because if I don't get to be there, then if there's something negative to say, I want to be saying it. So
it's great.
It's kind of like that friend who's like visiting Disney or Universal, and they're like, man, the lines are so long. And you're like, sucks to be you, even though you really want to be there with them. So
absolutely. Well, we just had a college young adult event at the beach the other night. And so, I mean, where can you do that? I mean, like it's the best being able to go to the beach for church. I mean, come on, I'm suffering. Jesus. I'm a missionary. So if you guys want to give to my cause here at the beach, you can cash at me or Venmo me as a coastal missionary.
Coastal missionary. I love it. That's amazing.
Genius. That's actually pretty genius.
Yes.
I'd buy into that, man.
Hey, someone's got to do
coastal missionary, bro. Someone's got to run with that.
So, well, I think that's going to be the thing, because Jesus has a lot of parables where he's by the water, and look at the work that Jesus did. And I'm not saying here that like you need to correlate me with Jesus here, but he did a lot of miracles down there by the ocean. So
yeah, that's where my wife is from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, only good things come from things by the beach. Sorry, John.
Yeah, not a whole lot of good ever came out of like Indiana, but we're here to celebrate. I've been there. That's why I'm here now.
That's right.
We've got an incredible guest with us today, a great friend. He's doing so many incredible things, serving pastors and leaders, businesses and ministries. It's called the Warrior Nation, but our guest today is Doc Farris. Doc, we're so excited that you're here with us.
Excited to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Well, we like to get the episode started with some rapid fire questions. These are don't think about it, just toss out the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Hey, what's the best sport that someone could play or watch?
Soccer.
Of all of your kids, who is your favorite?
Pass. No, I'll tell you, here's my favorite right now. My favorite is my son, because I've waited like 20 something years to get one, and God finally gave me a little boy. So he's about to be 2 and we're having fun. So
amen. Since you talked about your son, what is the manliest activity that someone could take part in?
Hunting.
And what are we hunting?
Oh man, whatever you want. I mean, we hunt everything: deer, turkey, ducks, bear.
Awesome.
Whatever.
Hey, what is the stupidest thing that you have ever heard from behind the pulpit?
Man, there was this. How long do I have to answer this? This is like there was this guy in college who put together an entire dissertation to a church education class on how the fruit that Adam and Eve ate from the tree was an actual grape. And he went through this whole thing. He had all this Bible stuff behind it. And I mean, I got to be honest with you, it was really impressive until one of my buddies raised his hand and he goes, Professor, whatever. He goes, I just want to remind you, he said that grapes don't grow on trees, they grow on vines, and literally imploded his entire, I mean, like this guy got visibly angry in the class, but that was probably like one of the highlights of a guy trying to sound really smart, but had no idea what he was talking about.
Well, speaking of fundamentalism, because that's probably where that came from.
It was a fundamental college for sure. You don't get that higher education in anywhere but a fundamental Baptist college. So.
No. If there were baseball cards made of like the top 3 to 5 fundamentalist pastors of all time, who would be the ones you want to collect the rookie cards of?
To do what? For like darts or just to throw
I'm
darts
thinking
out?
it's going to be a game like Pokemon where they have different powers and things.
Oh gosh. So we have to go with Jack Hyles, because Jack Hyles, he was the guy that broke out of the Southern Baptists and had the quote largest, fastest growing church in the world. And he was a stud in his own right. I mean, he was also a serial adulterer, but we'll pass on that. The other one would be you're probably gonna have to cut that one.
Well,
out.
everyone has a strength and a weakness. So fastest growing bus ministry, serial adulterer. One gets points, one loses.
Kind of like King David, though.
Yeah, no. This guy was a whole nother level. But anyway, I would. Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. I would have to go with just because this guy is so comical and I can't stop watching him, is Phil Kidd. Like I just think he is here's the thing. I'm enamored by him. He's like a rock star in his own right. But my favorite thing about him is his hair club for men. And so I would definitely go with him. And then I would have to say probably other than that would be John Hamblin. Ramblin' Hamblin. Yeah.
I think
because these guys are just so they entertain me, right? I get on Twitter with anonymous accounts because they don't let me. All of them block me, and to follow like Phil Kidd, and of course Giles is dead, but Phil Kidd and John Hamblin, and it's pure entertainment.
I think Hamblin's strength is a fresh, warm bread from the ovens of heaven, and weakness would be all of his sermons have to sound like this the whole way through.
Yeah, and have you ever seen his opening prayers? It is so scripted. Somebody put a post together the other day of his opening prayers and his meetings all over the country, and I mean they are the exact same. That boy's got it down. Hey, I just thought of another name that I think we gotta work with is Tony Hudson.
Oh, amen.
I mean, he's a dude. Is there anybody out there right now that entertains more than that guy?
I don't think so. He's my number one.
Yeah.
Yep.
You worked with him though, right?
No, we did some events together, but I didn't work at his church or with him per se. But when I was in fundamentalism, it was like a really cool honor to be speaking at the same event as Tony Hudson.
That Hudson was at.
Like,
oh yeah.
Can I just say the way Johnny you just said the way I was in fundamentalism, it makes it sound like you were in like a cult or something.
Well, I'm glad that's how it sounded, because that's definitely what it was.
The way it just rolled out.
So hold up, Eli. Are you a part of that? Did you grow up in that at all?
I couldn't tell you anybody you just listed.
Oh, bro. Yeah, it's a full blown cult.
Eli learned the IFB abbreviation on an episode of the Preacher's Kids podcast last year. So this has been really cool. Eli introduces me to all of the PKs that grew up in like a grace-filled, non-denom environment, and I introduce him to everybody else. And so it's been a fun partnership. Last question for you is, what is another name that one might refer to the pulpit as in the middle of a rant?
Sacred Desk.
The Sacred Desk. That's a winner. All answers on the board. That was the one worth the most points right there. Well, we're excited that you're with us today. Eli, why don't you kick us off?
Absolutely. Well, hey, we just like hearing from people like you. We just want to hear kind of your experience growing up as a pastor's kid. So if you could kind of take us up in the plane, looking down on the ground and just kind of showing us kind of what your life was like as a pastor's kid from that perspective, and maybe some perks, maybe some pains, everything in between there. And so, yeah, I'll let you go, man.
Yeah. So, my dad was raised, he was Church of Christ, and they did not, when he started his ministry, he went to Atlantic Christian College. It wasn't an independent Baptist college, of course. And his heart was for ministry. They started, in the 70s, they were part of that whole Jesus movement. So dad was reaching hippies, and he had the long hair, and, that was never a thing, right? They were just, whoever was for Jesus, they were for. And he ended up graduating from college. He goes to work for a guy in Tampa Bay area, Tampa, Florida. And this guy was also Church of Christ, but he was a hardcore Jack Hyles follower. In fact, he would preach Jack Hyles' messages 1 week after Jack Hyles. Like, he would get the tapes, remember the old cassette tape? He would get those tapes, he would preach those, and then he would write them out word for word. He would preach them. Anyway, that's where dad got introduced to that whole movement. And so it wasn't long after that, the pastor of that church at that time had a moral failure, and dad just kind of stepped into that role. And he inherited this independent, what was becoming an independent Baptist church. It was transferring from Church of Christ to Independent Baptist Church. And I was super young. In fact, when he took over as pastor, I was in third grade, right? So a good portion, but from the time, if you grew up in church, you were in church 9 months before you were born, right? So you were born, you're in the nursery, right? Like, you just grew up in that environment. And if if your parents were at any level involved in the church, serving on staff, you were a bit of you had that PK rock star status, right? Everybody wanted to be around you. We didn't not just have a church, we had a private school, and a very large one. So my entire life was, surrounded by the church and encompassed with church and church people. And so dad, he got immersed into that independent Baptist stuff. He started going out to pastor school. Are you familiar with that, John?
Oh, yes.
And, yeah, so he started going to pastor school, and this is a true story. He was there, place is jam-packed. He's up on the second row. Jack Hyles is up there just preaching his heart out. And he says, some of you pastors in here need to get your hair cut and quit acting like Jerry Rubin. Well, dad looks to his left, he looks to his right, and nobody around him. They all had the old IFB tapered cuts, right? Nobody in there had long hair but him. So he's like, well, he's definitely talking to me. And instead of dad getting angry, he went home, got his hair cut, got the fundamental Baptist cut. And that changed everything for us, right? We went in hardcore into the IFB world. Well, dad got connected with some of the big dogs in there, started traveling and speaking and being, he was invited out to the colleges. And of course, the better you are at speaking and the better of a communicator you are and how you lead size of your church will get you an unearned doctorate degree, right? So dad was starting to get these really important doctorate degrees from all these non-accredited colleges from all over the country. So we were deeply immersed into it. And so, and here's what's fascinating about growing up, not just in the church, but in a school where your dad is the pastor and he's also the administrator of the school and the principal. And the school was large. There's 600-700 kids in this school, right? So it was that's large for an independent Baptist school, right? And so you're at the helm of all of that, and so you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so there's a couple different tracks, I think, for me as a pastor's kid. You have the one track where you're always on display. Everything you do is on display. You've heard the term, you live in a glass house, and you always are told things like, hey, we've got to do it this way because people are watching and we have to set an example. So you're sort of in this sociological construct, you're designed and constructed to always be operating from a place of approval. That doesn't play out well in adulthood. We can get into that a little bit later, maybe. But the other track for me was in that independent Baptist world where I tell people all the time, we were basically Amish with televisions. We were not allowed to do anything. And by the way, the television that we had, we could barely watch it because we had a 3 cuss word rule. If there was 3 cuss words, you had to turn it off, right? And so we barely had television. But that created another tension because our school was an open school. And so this was weird, right? So you had all these people coming in. Most of them were flunkies they got in trouble in public school. And so their parents put them in our Christian school. So I was getting a taste of what was going on out in the real world, but I was never allowed to engage or to be a part of it. And so it was this really weird tension growing up. We weren't allowed to date. Here's a great rule. We weren't allowed to date until we got to college. And so there was all these, things that were going on and parties and things were happening, and you could never go or have a girlfriend or whatever because we weren't allowed to do that, right? And so there was a weird tension in that lane that was really, really difficult. And here's what it did for me. It I got an attitude of just, I hate church, and I don't want anything to do with God. And in fact, I remember my graduation year, one of the elders of the church said, "Hey, are you going to go to Bible college and follow in your dad's footsteps as a pastor?" And I gave him the double bird salute and said, "Absolutely not," with a couple words in front of it. But I mean, that's how angry I was, right? A lot of anger and bitterness. And it wasn't until I moved out and got away from home and got away from all of that and was able to really start my relationship with God outside of this performance gospel, that it all started to make sense. So we had a good childhood. We had a good life. My dad was super involved. He wasn't like a lot of these dads who were on mission to save America while they sacrificed their family on that altar. He didn't do that. He was at every ball game. He was a present with all, he was a part of my life. And we had a great relationship. We hunted during hunting season. We hunted together every year. Like we had a great relationship. That part was good, but everything else was not good, right? I don't have a good memory of church. I hated it. I hated growing up in that environment. And to go back what I said a minute ago, this sociological construct of you have to prove yourself to everybody created in me a sickness of approval addiction that really played out. So, when you're raised in a performance gospel context, you don't just shed that layer of, training and construct when you become an adult, right? In fact, it can get worse, and you live your whole life from that performance mindset. And it's such a jacked up, I mean, it's completely contrary to what I know today of the gospel, completely contrary of that. But I'm going to be honest with you, it took a lot of work and sitting a lot in front of a therapist. I spent a lot of time in therapy working through some of the stuff and really starting to inventory and identify the anger, right? And where my resentments were, so that I could get to that place of having a right relationship with God.
I believe that's why this podcast is so important for you that's listening, and why it seems as though in every other episode we're recommending a few different counseling opportunities for you. And my favorite is called Standing Stone. It's a counseling service that's available to pastors and their family absolutely free. And you can connect with them and have somebody to talk to, because there are pieces of that performance gospel, I love how you called that and labeled it, that we don't even realize in the moment until the rotten fruit of them has already ripened. And so talking with someone and connecting with someone can help identify some of those things early on and help you get a grip on them, especially when it comes to, like Eli and I were talking, we want to ask you about the betrayal and the forgiveness and the relationships and the trauma and all of those things. Like, how did you begin to break out of those things and identify them?
It's a great question. I think what the listeners have to understand is that what you just said, Jon, is so important, that we start to inventory and identify this as adults. There are two stages of conscience development. In our sociological construct as children, there are two stages of conscience development, right? Number one is conscience assimilation. So what happens is when you're in an environment, you are assimilating that environment. You're trying to make sense of that environment. So if you have a father that was angry, or a mother who was abusive, or you grew up in the independent Baptist or in the church in general, a pastor's kid, and all the stuff that you see in that, as you're growing up, the first stage of that is you're assimilating all that's happening. Well, the second stage that you move into is what's called conscience adaptation. You begin to adapt to that environment, and so it becomes a part of you, right? You don't just shed that stuff off; it becomes a part of who you are. And nobody understands this. And again, thank God for what you're doing and the pastor's kids who are engaging and a part of this. This is what I want to say to moms and dads who may be listening, who are pastors and who have children. It's like, you better realize that this is happening right now, and there's going in your child's life, and there is going to be some long-term effects if you don't put some guardrails and set some boundaries up and put some things in place that help to protect your kids from this, because you're creating approval addicts by saying things like, hey, we have to do this because everybody's watching, or hey, we can't do that because, you know, it may be a bad testimony. That was the one I hated the most. Listen, I do believe that there are ways that we can be a bad testimony, but I mean, we weren't allowed to go to the movies. This is how freaking inconsistent we were. You couldn't go to the movies because it was going to be a bad testimony. Somebody wouldn't know if you were going in to see a rated R movie or not. We don't want to be a stumbling block, right? But we could go into Blockbuster and rent movies from Blockbuster because it's not a movie theater, right? That was the depth, the profundity of that inconsistency that we were under. And so to answer your question, I had to become aware of the effect that that had on me. And what we do now with business leaders and pastors is what we call shadow work, right? So as an adult, I have to go back and shadow that young child, that little boy version of me, and walk through some of those pain points, which what we call the 3 I's: inventory, identify, and interrupt. I have to inventory some of that stuff that happened. I've got to identify the cause, because I can tell you with 100% certainty, the behaviors that I have as an adult are connected to those sociological constructs, right? As my conscience began to adapt to those things. And this is what I had to become aware of, like some of the issues that I had. By the way, I had awful relationships as an adult with people. I was inappropriate with women. That approval addiction put me in a place of always looking for the approval of even other, people that I shouldn't be getting the approval from, right? I had to go back and reverse engineer and connect the dots of those things. Now, hear me out. I'm not pointing the finger and blaming people, but I am saying that there is, on that psychological matrix, their environment plays a big role in that continuum. And if we're not becoming, or if we're not willing to become aware of what those things are connected to, we're going to just keep on recycling the same insanity and the same chaos in our life and our behaviors.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that some too, just in the sense of like the striving for approval. I remember one time I was hanging out at a friend's house. I think I've shared this on a episode before. Maybe I haven't. And I was interested in a girl. I was talking to her there at this. I mean, it was a birthday party, but it wasn't like an alcohol party. It wasn't like one of those kind of things. It was just a get together at a friend's house. And I remember someone that I knew that went to church with me, their parents were strict on dating. My parents weren't necessarily strict on dating at all. They just kind of, they taught us what to do in an appropriate way. Like, they kind of helped coach me through it. And I remember sitting there just interested in this girl and talking to her. And I think at one point we started dating, but we hadn't really told anybody yet. But I was sitting there holding hands with her on the couch, and it was just kind of like a thing. Well, this person who went to our church went back and told their parents, "Hey, if Eli's allowed to have a girlfriend, like, why can't I have a girlfriend? Like, if he can do this and he's the pastor's kid, shouldn't I be able to do this?" And I remember thinking at that moment, like, wow, I didn't realize that people were paying attention and basing some of their life even off of what I'm doing. And I remember that was like the first time I was like, wow, okay, this is different. Like, this is not what I thought it was going to be like.
Well, bro, when you're told, but think about this, when you're told your whole life that everything is taboo, and then you start to see other people who live their life where everything's not taboo. Here's the one, again, another great danger in that environment, in that world, is that we are hardwired for mystery. And so the more you tell me I can't, the more I want to do it. Right. And so that's literally what happens in that world, right? They're going, wait a minute, this guy's doing it, and he's a normal dude, and God's not striking him dead. And he's got a pretty good testimony. So what's it, this isn't adding up, right? And so I walked that out 100,000 times growing up.
Yep. And I think it was weird because I was sitting there, I was like, I'm 17, I may have even been 18 at the time. And I was just like, my parents trust me enough to make these decisions. They're the pastors, and our church wasn't a small church by any means. It was a pretty, good sized church. And I was like, hopefully, like, everybody else in the church isn't looking at me like an alien here for all this that's going on. And, I was like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I mean, it's not a sin to sit here and hug a girl, like, that's just not a sin. But to them, they're like, oh my gosh, if he can do that, why can't I do that? And next thing you know, their parents are calling me going like, hey, I didn't know, like, you're allowing your kids to do this. And they're like, yeah, he hugged a girl or held her hand, or like, big deal. And so,
well, again, it's that whole Yeah, it's the whole context of religions. Basically, God's good, you suck, try harder. And that's how, you live your life in that every day that you wake up. And it's like, well, how good is good enough? And how good do I have to be to be in good standing? Here's what sucks about the performance gospel too, though, is that you believe that the blessings of God in your life are predicated on what you do and how you perform rather than it being predicated in the nature of who God is.
Yeah.
And that's a hard rate. So what happens is you start to take credit for the good and the bad, right? Like if things fall apart, oh, I screwed up. If things are good, oh, I must have done better today, right? All of the glory comes back to you. And again, it's just it's a really, really sad place. And it's not just independent Baptists to do this. I mean, this is like an American church model.
Sure.
It's almost become a part of our ecclesiology, right? Like if you perform better, God's going to love you more. And so we create our churches in the context of behavioral modification, not character transformation.
You, in all of the things that you're doing and the people that you're serving, I want to talk about that in just a minute. But you put out a piece of content not long ago that said it is direction, not intention, that leads us to a destination. And that was really the ignition of a series of videos where you talked about healing from trauma and healing from betrayal and relationships and forgiveness. And I'm watching them in my context as a preacher's kid. And then I'm thinking about as a business leader. And then I'm thinking about now as a pastor. And it's blowing my mind. You even did a video not long about your marriage and relationships and all of that. And I saved it. I'm like, I need to watch this a bunch of times. And so, our friend is listening who graduated from his dad's house, several years ago. He's in his 20s now. He's married. He's moving on. And now he's looking back at, I have trauma and there's been betrayal and I'm dealing with unforgiveness and all of those things. What do you say to that guy? How can we be emotionally aware and healthy now?
So it goes back, John, this is a great question. It goes back to what I said a minute ago. We have to realize that we have adapted and become a part of those environments. So you and I, the three of us right now, we are nothing more than the sum total of our past circumstances, events in life, situations, sociological contracts. Like we're the sum total of those things. And so we're carrying that baggage. And so the first thing that I say to people in this is you cannot do it alone. If you could fix this on your own, you would have already fixed it. And so you cannot do it alone. You have to bring somebody in the narrative that knows what they're doing and can walk you through this. And I want to just say this. I say this in love. There's no judgment or condemnation here. Be careful going in to sit down with pastors in a church to do this. You need somebody who is either licensed in therapy or does this professionally and for a living, that can unpack some of the things that need to be unpacked. Because again, we only see it through the lenses that we've been taught to see it through. And you've got to bring somebody into that narrative who's seeing it through a different set of lenses and is going to be able to help you connect the dots. A good therapist can finish your sentence, not because they've been there or done it, but because they know how to connect the dots in what, again, I call it the process of reverse engineering. So here's what it looks like for me. What is the behavior or pattern that I have today? All behaviors and patterns can be traced back to something. So remember this, guys, every outward behavior is a manifestation of an inward brokenness, right? We cannot change what is outwardly broken by throwing outward things at it. We've got to get to the root, right? So we look at it and go, what's the behavior and pattern in my life that continues to lead to chaos and insanity? With 100% certainty, that's going to be reverse engineered. It's going to be connected to a fear. There's some fear that you have in your life that you're operating out of. When you reverse engineer from that fear, you're going to go back to a resentment. That fear will always be connected to a resentment. What's a resentment? It's nothing more than an expectation that went unmet. And then that resentment can be reverse engineered back to a wound. There's going to be a name. There's going to be a situation. There's going to be a moment. There's going to be something that is attached to that resentment. And so in order to change the behavior, we have to eliminate the fear. In order to eliminate the fear, we have to transcend the resentment. In order to transcend the resentment, we have to heal from the wound. And so again, you have to bring somebody into that narrative.
That's really good. I'm glad that you pointed out the sitting down with the right type of person, because when I've sat down with people who just wanted to be my, if you're mad at it, I'm mad at it corner, they've defined trauma as anything that I didn't like. But then I've also sat down with people who were well-intentioned and who loved Jesus, but we're looking at things that were traumatic and saying that's just part of life.
Right.
Can you help us define what actually is trauma? Because I think one generation is like nothing is, and one generation, everything is. Is there a middle ground?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think that trauma is going to be different for everybody. So, you can have two people that were abused by their father, and one guy's going to look at it through he's just he was able to rise above it in his mind, and he just kind of plowed through it and pushed through. He has this really deep, profound character, and he pushed through it. And another guy is going to be affected differently, right? So I don't believe we're all affected the same by trauma, and so I'm not sure that there's a blanket definition to what that trauma is. Here's what I would say. I would say that whatever behaviors or patterns that you have in your life that continue to go full circle and continue to lead you into the same chaos and the same insanity, I will guarantee you didn't wake up one day and go, man, I want to be a porn addict. Or you didn't wake up one day and go, man, I really want to struggle with lust. Or I want to, my goal is to just be angry and to hate everybody. That's not what we do as human beings, right? It is connected to something. And so with 100% certainty with everybody that we work with, and when we do this reverse engineering, it always comes back to a wound. So one of the things that we ask people to do is we encourage them to start asking themselves some leading questions, right? Like, hey, how was your operating from a context of rigorous honesty? How was your relationship with your dad? Is there any significant moment that you have with him that you'd go, man, haven't thought about this in a long time, but holy smokes, right? Because when they start to tell those stories, we have the ability then to take that moment and connect it to something that's happening in the present, right? So we take these past experiences and we connect the dots and we go, well, brother, the reason that you're struggling with your wife right now and you're struggling with this whole thing, you're dealing with abandonment and rejection. And your father may have been a pastor and he was a good guy, but he spent most of his time at the church and he sacrificed you on the altar of trying to build a big church, right? Like, it's helping to connect that. So guess what? Two things happen. This is, again, back to the conscience adaptation. Two things happen. When we adapt to that behavior, we act out to protect ourselves from it, right? Number one. Number two, we start to actually do it. So the things that we hated the most about our parents are the things we end up doing the most as a parent, right? We start to live those things. They become generational curses, which we know is true. I mean, Exodus 25, God said, I'll visit the iniquity of the fathers 3 and 4 generations to those who hate me and despise me, right? So we know that generational curses are a real thing, but that's how it's manifested in our life. So I think it begins with, what are the behaviors and the patterns in your life like right now that if you were to be rigorously honest, you'd go, this continues to lead me to chaos and insanity. Great. Let's start there and work backwards.
Eli, has this been the most educational, therapeutic, helpful episode that we've ever recorded? Because I think it might just have become number one.
I feel like I went to school, went to ministry, and went to therapy, or went to church, school, church, and therapy in the same 30 minutes.
The last 30 minutes have been more valuable than just about any seminary class I ever took. So,
have we been 30 minutes already?
We've been 30 minutes already. Like,
wow, that's too bad.
That's how good time flies when you're having fun.
For sure.
For sure. Well, hey, I want to ask you a quick question real quick. And I just want to know, tell us about your kind of transition from full-time ministry to kind of where you're at today. So catch us up on kind of modern day where you're at, and just kind of take us to how that journey came about.
Yeah. Are you even in ministry? Like, can you call what you do ministry? Because you're not behind the sacred desk week in and week out. For services.
Too bad. Like, hey, we are. We're parachurch now.
Oh, there you go.
So it's not a real ministry. No, yeah. So great question, Eli. I appreciate it. Mark and he's going to tell his story, and his story is just so fascinating as well. But, we were walking this out and didn't even know it. He was walking it out in his life. I was walking out in my life. I started working with the business guys in about 6.5 years ago. I was in my abiding time, and the Father speaks to me. I was camping out in the book of John, and he says these words to me. It was so profound. He said, you're not going to spend the last half of your life entertaining Christians, but influencing world changers. And it was a really interesting, the way he spoke it and said it. And I just started pressing in and praying. And about 2 or 3 months after that, I started getting phone calls from these young millennials around the country who were asking me. They were business guys 25 to 35, making millions of dollars in real estate and stuff, and asking me if they could hire me as a spiritual mentor. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is, right? I've been in church and pastored my whole life. So that really began the journey. And then the Lord just really was pulling us away from, I started to become very disenchanted with the American church. And I'm going to say the American church model, because the American church is God's people, but the model and how we were, what our ecclesiology had become, very disenchanted. And so my wife and I were praying, and we do not move on any big thing in life until we are in complete unity. And so when we are not in unity as a husband and wife, we go to what's called neutrality. And that's just a time of praying. And by the way, if you don't move to neutrality in your marriage, you'll move to resignation. And that always leads to resentment and anger and typically divorce. So we were in neutrality and praying, because I was there, but she wasn't there for 2 years and 2 months. And just asking, for the Father to give us that green light to close the door to, we raised up a leader at the church that we were in, and to move into this full time. And in September of 2021, the Lord said to her, it was time. And I can tell you, take you to the spot on the road where she said, hey, the Lord, the Father has released me and it's time. And so we were able, even those 2 years and 2 months when I wanted to go, she wasn't ready. We were still in unity because we were operating from that place of neutrality. And then when she said it's time, man, boom, it was over. By November, I had stepped away, and we moved up to the ranch that we have where we're at now, and full time into what we're doing. Interestingly enough, Mark was going through that exact same thing at the exact same time. And that's when God brought us together. So it's a full-blown, profound, supernatural move of God. And it's been really cool to see it happen. Yeah.
Incredible. Well, you're killing it. I love seeing your videos too, and just like your brilliance. So like when I see your social media videos and stuff like that, like everyone who's listening to this needs to follow him and listen to what he's putting out on there too.
I need to know who you are on. I need to know who you are on Instagram. I didn't. You got to send me a thing so I can follow you.
Yeah, I had been doing it from our PK account, the Pastor's Kid account. But gotcha. I did just follow you before this. Like, okay, you would not, because we were probably even on this when I did that. But I was going through on there, and I'm like, this is free content. Like, sweet, this is awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, it's Gary V level value without all of the F-bombs dropped in there. The new F word is forgive. That's what it is for
perfect
for the Warrior Nation. So in the show notes, if you scroll up or you check out the description on YouTube, you can find Doc's social media and their website. But why should every PK check out the Warrior Nation or make their dad look at it as well? What's going on in that movement? And just kind of close us out by telling us about what God's doing there.
So this is the beautiful part about Mark and his involvement and, our partnership and what we do. Mark, God has given that man incredible favor in the church world. And, we have started a whole division now called Servant Warriors, and we are working with pastors. In fact, I'm at the retreat center now, the new one that we just got. And we got a bunch of work getting ready. Our first retreat that we're doing here is for pastors. Our pastors' retreats are 3-day getaway retreats. We're going to do couples retreats for pastors, retreats for just pastors and their team. And what we're doing is we're teaching them the principles and concepts of abiding. We're walking them through the psychology and a lot of the stuff that we talked about here today, how to become the healthiest version of you. We believe that if we can get our pastors healthy, we can get our churches healthy. And so it's a great opportunity to step into something. As far as I know, guys, and I'm not in the world as much as you guys are, but I don't know of anybody who's doing what we're doing at the level that we're doing it. And again, we've been doing it with business guys for 6 years. And these are hot. I mean, some of the guys that we work with, that we mentor, are CEOs of globally traded companies. And God's given us incredible favor in that space. But it's moving now into the pastor's world. And I can tell you, the pastors that are connected, I mean, their worlds are being rocked. And so just had a guy call me today. They just took all of our abiding stuff, the videos that we shot. They're doing it in their church. Church runs about 15,000 people, and told them this week and said, we cannot believe we are literally going to take every year. We're taking our church through this. And so there's a sweeping revival that is happening. But here's something fascinating, guys, and I'll leave it with this. Mark, lock this in. the next revival and awakening is not coming out of the American church model. It's coming out of the marketplace. And God is raising up marketplace apostles where this revival is starting. We have guys that we are leading who are not pastors. One guy's a franchiser, got 500 employees. He's led 350 of his employees to Jesus. I mean, they marry, bury, and baptize in their business.
Wow.
There is a revival that's coming out of there. And I just think if the churches start paying attention to the marketplace, the game is over.
Incredible.
Man. Hey, if you're tired of your quote unquote quiet time or devotional time or whatever you call it being stale, stagnant, boring, or non-existent, I want to encourage you to check out what's happening with what the Warrior Nation calls abiding. And it is absolutely life-changing. All of that information is in the show notes. And I promise you and your family, your church, your business will be better for it. I don't know of anybody doing what they're doing, like Doc said, at the level that they're doing it. It's incredible.
Yep.
Well,
awesome.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I was going to say thank you for being on here and for dropping some truth, but also just some practical help. Sometimes we forget the practicality of some of this stuff and we try to overcomplicate things. And so thank you. I know that there's going to be a lot of pastors' kids who are going to be blessed to have listened to this, and just people in general. Not even there's people who aren't pastors' kids that listen to this because they're just interested to hear our perspectives on life from a pastor's kid and from a ministerial standpoint. So thank you for kind of talking us through that today. Great job.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Eli, normally after the guest hops off, we spend a few minutes discussing our favorite part of the episode, but I don't think we can do that today. The whole episode was our favorite part, and you probably need to rewind and listen through this 2 and 3 more times. We're so grateful for you being a subscriber to this podcast and watching this on YouTube. Thanks for sharing it and rating it and reviewing it. All of that you do helps us connect with preachers' kids just like you all around the country, all around the world. And so in the words of our very favorite theologian, Bob the Tomato, God made you special and he loves you very much. And we can't wait to see you again next week.
Amen. See you guys.